Good morning, everyone. Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet here, joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Jeff Johnson, good morning to you. He always seems to be hanging around right off the bat, which we entirely appreciate. Roger as well as a returning guest. And I love this one from Wrench Doozer, who's going to wish Ken a happy birthday in the stream. I still want to know how this happened. I love it. I love it that every time we go on, people are wishing you happy birthday. It must have been that one time when it actually was your birthday, first thing in the morning, or it was like midnight, and we kind of brought in your birthday that time. Hey, I guess it means that people have been around and they're kind of catching the theme to the show. And we always say we love it when the audience contributes to the show, and that's one thing that's grown organically. Like, we haven't pushed that narrative. Happy birthday, Ken. I'll join in. How are you doing?
I'm excellent, and I get maybe people know that with my sunny view on life, maybe I celebrate every day as though it is my birthday. So let's go with that.
Oh, geez, you need to celebrate every day like you got two holes in one. Because a birthday that comes around once a year. That's once in a lifetime kind of stuff. But yes, Kenny's got a sunny disposition on life, and I find it makes mornings like this, so much more enjoyable when you get started. So Ken got a great show coming up here today. Jeff Marek's going to join us in about 10 minutes or so. Looking forward to talking with him. One of the most interesting men in the sports media, the Canadian sports media. Really interesting guy. And Sami Cosentino, a guy who is a buddy of both of ours, but I didn't even really know that. Like, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever been in a room at the same time with you and Sami. But I first met him a couple of years ago when I went and I worked a World Juniors in Montreal. And I remember meeting him, and I'd always seen him on TV all the time. And I thought, okay, every time you meet someone new and you're working with them, you wonder how it's going to go, and you wonder how long it's going to take to kind of get on the same page. And like with Sami, it stands out in my mind as it was like, in 3 minutes, I was like, I love this guy. This guy is like one of my favorite people in the world. And I've only known him for like 90 seconds. Absolutely great dude. And you have like a long history with him. He's basically your hotel when you go to Toronto.
That's true. Yes. Been a pleasure to spend a lot of time with Sami and Alana and their family. Great folks, and first met them, I think, covering the American Hockey League, and then we spent a lot of time together during that Memorial Cup in Brandon in 2010. So, just a great human being. Our genuine love for baseball and hockey kind of brought us together initially, and we've stayed close ever since, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, you guys are the hybrid hockey and baseball guys. There will be baseball analogies to explain hockey flying left, right, and center here today. I guarantee it. We'll for sure be asking Sami about that. And Mark Richter talking about Jeff Marek, the Mac Richter talking about Jeff Marek, the encyclopedia. We definitely want to tie into that. Before he gets on here, I've talked before in this space about Jeff Johnson, who is a long time Hockey Night in Canada producer who will have worked with Jeff Marek in the past, who I keep in real close contact with. He's a really good friend of mine. And once he knew that I was going to be having Jeff Marek on the show, he said, be prepared for him to be spitting like the minutia of, this one-time Manitoba hockey player's stats when he was in Adam and Pilot Mound or something like that, right? And that's one of the things I really want to dig into with him, because I'm fascinated by some of the ways that people in our industry's minds work. Like the ability to hold on to that kind of information. Do they go digging for it, or is it just something they hear once and it sticks? I've got a few examples of my life of those little things that kind of go through, and for whatever reason they get stuck in your mind. But a guy like Jeff Marek, it's that steel trap. He doesn't let a lot of it out. So it's going to be great. Going to be great to catch up with him. Let's talk quickly before we get into this race in the North Division, which suddenly the race for first has become really interesting. Had the potential to kind of get out of hand last night and not be that much of a race. But Ken, how much stock do you put in the fact that first place is up for grabs in the North Division?
It's certainly interesting, Sean. I know that the Mark Scheifele was very quick to downplay it, that their only concern is on their own team and how they're playing. And we know Paul Stastny talked earlier about not flipping the switch and getting into into commitment level and not being selfish and committing to the the way they need to play. They know the formula, they know the template. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. We know the Leafs were missing some key players yesterday, but the Jets were also missing their captain, and suddenly the season series is even. Sean, each team has accumulated 8 points with 3 left, so I think it was important for them to be within range. And I think it was also, I think it was important for Connor Hellebuck. We know that after a rare, subpar outing, which for him is still better than most, but tough goal on Monday, came back with a really impressive effort, and then some of the Jets stars, took care of the marquee yesterday, shared the marquee. Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers with another brilliant effort, and Mark Scheifele with a 3-point game. So, 3 more meetings to come. I think those will be the ones that'll probably tell us more about the season series and what it might look like come playoff time. But I do think it's, to a degree, it's important. And, we know that, as you mentioned, we've referenced 2018 a lot, Sean. When first place is on the agenda or in the mix, it was also on the mix in 2019 before that late stumble as well. When a team has something to play for and they're trying to build for the playoffs, I think it is important at a time where it can be tough to just kind of play out the string, if you will.
You know what we didn't talk about last night, which we probably owed it to him to talk about it, is Mark Scheifele showing up in that series against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know you talked, but we should have really kind of hit that home because we'd used this space quite a bit, talking about the fact that at the beginning of the season, he wanted to raise his name up amongst the Connor McDavids and the Austin Matthews. And our response to that was, well, if you're going to do that when you go up head to head against those guys, you got to show them that you can go toe to toe and punch for punch with those guys. Now, I know Austin Matthews wasn't in the lineup last night, but Mitch Marner is a player I have all the respect in the world for. I think he's absolutely phenomenal. That was that moment. And I guess if we're building towards the playoffs, if Mark Scheifele is building towards his game and starting to show that he can have those kind of games against those big boys, that's really good news for the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, the next game against the Edmonton Oilers, perfect time to show. Now he's passed that test, or he's gone through that hurdle. Going to be really interesting to see how he does against Connor McDavid. We know those two have a friendship, and we know that kind of like the Jack Campbell Connor Hellebuck thing, how Jack Campbell really pushes himself to try and emulate and top Connor Hellebuck when they play. I'm sure Mark Scheifele has those feelings about Connor McDavid. All right, we're not going to hesitate any longer because Jeff Marek showed up early. He's a prompt guy. He does everything right by the book, and for sure he showed up 5 minutes early for the interview, so we're going to bring him into the show.
Right down the middle, boys. Right down the middle, on time, on side. What's up, gentlemen? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Hope my setup is okay here. I don't have much to look at behind me, but is that all right?
You're doing great. You look great. And hey, as a guy who tackles like so many different mediums, you're a guy I knew would be comfortable and confident coming onto something like this. Speaking of different mediums, I wanted to, I'm digging into you a little bit in your past. I'm fascinated by your start in the industry. You get in doing wrestling. And so I'm thinking you don't end up calling wrestling unless you're a wrestling fan. And both Ken and I were wrestling fans growing up. I'm always fascinated by, the colorful aspect of wrestling. And if you go back to guys who called wrestling like you did, guys doing the interviews like the Mean Gene Okerlunds of the world and the Jesse the Body Venturas, and even Vince McMahon, who played the great straight man for a while there before he, got in front of the camera and started, changing the industry with the way he did it. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the things in that arena that affected you and maybe have shaped you as a broadcaster.
That is a really interesting. No one's ever asked me that before. So my interest in wrestling started really young. My dad would take me to Maple Leaf Gardens. This is when Tunney was running in conjunction with Jim Crockett Promotions. That was Mid-Atlantic. So the top 3 matches always had to be Mid-Atlantic matches. So the first main event that I saw was one of the greatest in-ring feuds of all time, and that's Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat over the U.S. Mid-Atlantic Championship, 2 legends. And that's the first main event that I saw. I remember going home with my dad thinking all wrestling is that good. I learned much later that it wasn't, and that I'd probably seen the best match I'd ever seen in my life. So I peaked. But I covered wrestling. I used to do a radio show, used to have a website, worked on Canada's first online broadcaster doing a show called Live Audio Wrestling. The station was called Virtually Canadian, and I got into it because I was the program director of the station, and we needed to source programming. Actually, Sid Sixero was one of our first hires. Him and a guy by the name of Mike Stevenson used to do this crazy hockey show, and it still would rank as one of the best hockey shows you guys would have ever heard. But I kind of approached it. I kind of approach it the same way that I would approach anything, and kind of that I approach hockey now, which is, how does this work? Like, what is the real story here? What is actually going on? This is in the era where, wrestling started to give you a peek behind the curtain. And, I always sort of cringed when I heard reporters or hosts, interview wrestlers in character. And I always thought to myself, if I ever had a chance to interview Tom Cruise, would I interview him as if he was Jerry Maguire, or would I interview him as if he's like
That's
Tom
a great
Cruise?
point.
So why are you doing this? Okay, it's Hulk Hogan. His name is Terry Bollea. He's from Tampa. He has this wonderful backstory as a human being. Why would you interview him as a character? And so that's sort of what I went on. But I sort of tackled it the same way that I tackle hockey, and we do this on the 31 Thoughts podcast, which is essentially the same way. How does this work? Is essentially the question, Sean and Ken, I've been asking my whole life about everything. And I'll tell you, Winnipeg specifically holds a very special place in my heart for professional wrestling, because I grew up watching Saturday afternoons. We had wrestling from Vancouver at 3:00 with the Tomco promotion. There was local on CH channel 11 at 1:00, but at noon on global television, it was AWA, American Wrestling Association, and all of the main event matches that they would show were all matches that were shot at Winnipeg Arena. And they were the best ones. And so that's where I got introduced to Nick Bockwinkel and Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens and Baron Von Raschke and Jerry Crusher Blackwell, etc. Some fantastic stuff, and it all came out of Winnipeg. I grew up thinking that Winnipeg is this, the Gagne, Greg Gagne and Vern Gagne. Right? Yeah. There you go. Great comment from Sandy. I grew up thinking that Winnipeg was the Mecca of professional wrestling, because every Saturday I got a main event from Winnipeg Arena on AWA Wrestling.
Speaking of wrestling, we had a Baron Von Raschke reference last night. Somebody asked about ripping phone books, and I've got a great minutia one for you, Jeff. Okay. I witnessed live the only UCF card held in Winnipeg when Sting had broken out of the NWA. Yeah. He was in the main event here, and I was telling Sean, I have in a box at home at Ken Senior's house, I still have a UCF wrestling hat, trucker hat somewhere that I'd awesome. Love to find. A great collector's item.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of guys, and a lot of the guys that did the amateur circuit for years. I know Adam Copeland is certainly one of them, who will still talk about this promotion to this day. There is a badge of honor that a lot of pro wrestlers have from that era if you did the Tony Condello tours. Tony Condello was one of the local promoters, and he would have these tours where, everybody is every drive is a white knuckle drive, and it's icy roads and it's horrible conditions to go to, wrestle in front of 50 people and make $25. But that was a badge of honor for all of these guys. How many Condello tours did you do? How many times did you work for? It's fascinating. And listen, there were so many guys that I know we talk a lot about the Heart promotion in Calgary, but those Condello tours, man, the guys are all really, really proud of doing those shows and doing those tours. There you go, jumping Jimmy Brunzell. There's another Killer Bees later on. The crowd knows what's up.
Our audience could do this all day. It's funny you bring that up. That kind of touches me in the way that, Ken will get this as well. We both played senior hockey in Manitoba here, and you hop on the old dingy team bus and you drive in -40 in blowing storms and head to same thing to an arena full of 60, 70 people who pay their hard-earned money to come down and watch you slap the puck around the rink for a couple hours. But I always thought that would make a really good documentary, following a senior hockey team in the middle of Canada who, show up to work the next day and go to the steel mill and do whatever with the, their arm barely working because they got into it and got hit last night and got into a fight. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I showed up to a job with a black eye because I'd throw the knuckles. The first year I played senior, I fought every third game. And you'd show up to work with black eyes. I was a student teacher at the time, and I showed up to St. Norbert Collegiate with 2 black eyes. And the students in the class said, "What, did you get in a fight last night?" And I was like, yeah. I play hockey. This is how it goes.
The game on Friday night. So there's 2 things there. There's one, I've always felt that, much like in the spirit of the HBO 24/7 series, that first one with the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Washington Capitals, which we all loved, which was so eye-opening for everybody. I've always felt that there are 2 great documentaries to be made in hockey, and both HBO 24/7 style. One, exactly what you're talking about. Follow a senior team, and there are some legendary senior teams, some great ones in Newfoundland. That might be the place to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Great senior teams that you can follow around. And secondly, I think it would be fascinating to an HBO 24/7 style special or documentary on the women of USA versus Canada.
Yeah.
Because publicly they put on the front like it's kumbaya and we're all climbing up the same mountain, all have the same goals. You guys have talked to these athletes, right?
We talked to
Cassie
about this last week,
So
and about the balance between trying to push women's hockey forward and doing it linked arm in arm with someone that you passionately despise. Yeah, it's great.
I think a peek into that world, and Cassie's a great one, because that was, for my money, the heat of the rivalry. Like, Salt Lake was the heat of the pinnacle of this rivalry. And
agree.
I don't know if Cassie told you the bitches never win story about one member of the United States team who said that to her. I think it might have been after the World Championship. And then Cassie, I'll give it to Cassie. She's never told me who the player is. But there was one U.S. player who, in Handshake Alley, after USA beat Canada, would have been at World Championships, shook Cassie's hand and said, "Bitches never win." And so Cassie wrote that down and took it everywhere for the year. And she said it took everything in her not to say that back to her in Handshake Alley at Salt Lake. That to me is one of the stories of great restraint by Cassie Campbell. But wouldn't you like to watch a behind the scenes documentary about, the nature of that rivalry and because we don't see a ton of women's hockey to begin with, and we really don't see that part at all. That to me would be fascinating. I would love that.
Well, we said that. I said it on the show last week. I actually think it was one of the greatest rivalries in sports. Like we talk about what happens in U.S. Canada hockey on the men's side of things, and Russian and Canadian hockey, but I mean that was one where the passion consistently spilled over, and we were lucky to be able to see it. Yeah, I wanted to ask you this: the clearly you know the promoters who were involved in wrestling. You know all this behind the scenes stuff. You strike me as the kind of kid, if your parents bought you a watch when you were a kid, you were the one who took it apart to see how it worked on the inside. Well, where does that compulsion for you come from? The kind of need to know what's happening behind the scenes, the need to know how things work and how things come together.
That's a great question. I don't know. I really don't. I've always gone deep with things that I've been interested in, and trust me, like a couple of things here. Like I've made room for a lot of useless information that has forced practical information, things you need to, like when you go to vote or when you need to get through a day, is not in my brain anymore, because I've made all this room for hockey and sports and things that I'm interested in. But when I get into something like, what's the old saying, in for a penny, in for a pound, that's always the way that they've done it. Like, was it Michael Caine and Batman? Obsession is a young man's game. And I was always like that as a kid. I remember my parents, and maybe, you like this one. So my parents, when I was a kid, when the Hockey Hall of Fame was at the CNE, before it moved to its place now at Front Street and Yonge, during the summer, my parents would go to the CNE, they'd go to the rides, the food building and all that. And I just wanted to go to the Hall of Fame. So they would leave me there for the whole day. And so I was that guy. I was that kid with the note. This is pre-internet, obviously. The writing everything down, watching all the videos, taking notes. And honestly, guys, I could go there every day and watch the same videos over and over again and read the same things and memorize all the plaques and all the stats and all of it. And I think back to me now, I think I was like 7 or 8 years old. I have kids that are that age, and I would never consider, leaving them in the middle of a carnival, whether it's the Hockey Hall of Fame or not, and then just come back to check in every couple of hours. This is probably why my parents were never on the cover of Today's Parent magazine. I don't know that it's very safe parenting, but I think that's what, as I can look back now, Sean and Ken, I think that's where it began for me, is just going to the Hall of Fame and being fascinated with all of it and wanting to go with notebook after notebook and just write it all down and then go home and just read it over and over. And then I would have my dad test me on things. Man, I was a loser. I'll tell you another thing. This kept me single for a lot of years. Your boy here was single for a lot of years because of these types of obsessions that I've had. Trust me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the minutia also, Jeff, and it got me back thinking about how I loved in my sport. I couldn't wait for my dad to come home with Sports Illustrated. I mean, spending time in the library, going through the hockey news. And, my dad worked for Golden West Radio, CFAM 950. Reynold LeBoon would always bring me an extra copy of the Jets media guide. And I just couldn't wait to rip through that. And I would, same thing, studying, where's Hannu Järvenpää from? What was his backstory? And so I was really...
with the Toros. My dad would take me to Toros games, and I would just devour programs. And they would sell old programs, too. I guess they're trying to make a buck as much as they could. Not just that game's program, but okay, we played the Nordiques 2 weeks ago. You want to buy one of those programs? Oh, Calgary Cowboys, they were here. I know it's Winnipeg Jets tonight, but Houston Aeros, Whalers, all of it. So I had these stacks.
Yeah, I
was the same way. Media
boxes.
guides and programs, all of it. I'm with you, Ken.
I want to ask you about a story I heard you talk about, both you and Elliot, about your first time on Hockey Night in Canada, because you guys were talking about it, and I had wondered. So my first time that I was ever going to be on Hockey Night in Canada, I got the call from Ed Hall to cover off a game. This it was when I wasn't, full-time taking on the Jets games for Hockey Night in Canada, and I had trouble sleeping for a month leading into it. I was so nervous. It's the first thing I thought about when I woke up in the morning. It's the last thing that I thought of when I went back to bed. And I was, I took it as kind of being, maybe I'm not built for this industry because I'm so rattled and affected by this. And it was when I finally heard you guys talk about your first experience that I thought, okay, no, it's okay to be like that. It's okay to care that much about something like that. It's okay to be, to see that stage and kind of rattle in your boots for a while. Go over that story, because I just thought, for maybe it's selfish on me, but that really spoke to me when you guys had that conversation.
December 29th, 2007. That was mine. It was Ottawa, Washington. It was at the nation's capital, and I remember my first assignment for Hockey Night that day. And I had known, going into the season, that I was going to do a handful of rink sides, and that was going to be my first one. So you put it off and you try not to think about it. You park it for a bit. But then as the day gets closer and closer, as you know, it's okay, Saturday's coming up here. Here we go. So December 29th, 2007. I can recall specifically the first thing I had to do. Ron was going to set up. It's the pregame show. Ron's going to set it up. There's going to be 3 boxes. It's going to be Ron. It's going to be Elliot, who's in Toronto, I think for a Toronto Buffalo game. And then welcome to Hockey Night in Canada. Jeff Marek covering off the Ottawa Senators, Washington Capitals. Alexander Ovechkin's in town. Jeff. So that's going to be the throw. And I get 2 questions with OV bench side and then throw back to – no, I think I had to throw to Elliot. And I can recall so much happened in a split second. So you're hearing it in your ears. You're at the rink, and Ron's doing the big open, and it's freaking Ron McLean. Here's Ron McLean. What am I doing here? All those doubts you've ever had about yourself all just start flooding. And then as he's starting his throw to me, I start. Again, it's just memories, and it's sitting on my family couch, and it's Saturday nights, and it's watching the game, and it's wanting to be a hockey player as a kid and not being good enough, but sticking with the game. And this is this passion / habit that it's always been Hockey Night in Canada and in this country just comes flooding back. And I had that what am I doing here moment. Like it's that split second, all those memories come flooding back. And then you think right away, don't screw it up, don't screw it up, don't screw it up. This pocket in Canada, don't take this one in the ditch, don't drive this one off the road, just keep it on the rails, ask your question, get it back, get it over to Elliot in Toronto. And honestly, in that split second, guys, where Ron started his throw and concluded it to me in Canada, everything came back. Mom, dad, hockey night, playing as a kid, all those great games we all watched together. I don't know what I stammered out to Ovechkin, what my nature of my questions were. And I remember at the end of it, going back to collect notes to go do my next bench side. And, you get a bunch of texts from all your buddies and all that. And I remember thinking to myself, really cool things will happen with you no matter who you are if you just do one thing at the end of every day. Just stay alive. At the end of all of it, you will see a lot of neat things. You'll experience a lot of neat things if you, at the end of the day, just say, I stayed alive and I got to do this. And as you get older, you don't want things as much as you're grateful for things. I find in my life, like I don't really want a lot of things. I'm in a place right now I'm sort of realizing how grateful I am for things, and that's one of the things that I'm grateful for. Just to have that opportunity.
Love it. Great article too from Lisa Dillman, my former colleague at The Athletic.
She's great,
at This Week. Just an absolutely great human being, great writer. She talked about your relentless preparation, Jeff. I mean, for people who just tune in to the show on Monday, can you tell us a little bit about what can you tell us about your preparation style and what it's like to try to prepare for that marathon that is Monday's NHL trade deadline?
It's not really one weekend worth of prep. It's I mean, you guys are the same way. Like we're just doing this all day long. That the weekend going into it, I try to, in my head, go through all the rosters, and I'll do this before every single trade deadline. I'll always challenge myself. I need to find one thing to say about every player in the NHL. To me, my job is have a thought on every single player and every single team. If I can go into a show like Trade Deadline or Free Agent Day is another day like that as well, really get to test your chops. If I can say one thing about every single player, have one fact and one thing I can say about every single team, then I'll feel prepared. And I won't be comfortable in my own skin unless I'm prepared to say something about Yanni Hakanpää, or I'm prepared to say something about anybody in the NHL. That's the sort of test that I have for myself. But that's, you guys are the same way. Like we all do the same things here, guys. Like your preparation is no different than mine. You pay attention all day and you make your phone calls and you get a sense of where the industry's at and where the teams are at and where the players are at and who does what and who wants what and where you're going and what trades are sort of percolating. We all kind of do the same thing. For trade deadline, I try to make sure that I have one thing that I can say, at least one thing about every single player.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I've had people ask me about the preparation that I do for the job. And they ask about like, when did you start doing it? How did you, like, what goes into holding yourself to that? And I'd said, I was doing this before I did this job. Like I'd sit at home on the computer and I'd go through the stats sheets and I'd be looking at how different guys, and I'd be spitting it out to my buddies, in the hockey room. And I was doing all that anyways. I thought I might as well just go out and get paid for it.
So that's what makes sports so unique. And this is why I love it, because you guys get it, I get it, we all get it. You get instantly fact checked right away.
Oh yeah.
Instantly. Like this is the one profession where you can look at safely and say, no matter how big the audience that I'm broadcasting to, a lot of these people know more than I do. And if I mess up, they're going to call me on it, and they're going to call me on it in real time. That can be intimidating or that can be motivating, depending on your perspective. But I've always had in the back of my mind, there's a lot of people that I'm talking to right now who know way more than I do. So if I even think about, I'm just going to surf on this show today, no problem, I can fake the funk, just get through it. No, there's a lot of people that are ready to pounce. So stay motivated that way. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like, we were all doing this before we had microphones in front of our faces.
Exactly.
Loving the personal insight. We only have you for a few more minutes. Yesterday, Paul Maurice, his face lit up when I asked him about the first time he saw Nikolai Ehlers. I know you've been watching him closely for a long time, Jeff. I'm curious for your initial impression of Ehlers, and then to see what it's been like for him to grow into one of the best wingers in the North Division and possibly the National Hockey League with the progression he's been making.
He's great. Two quick stories. I want to give you a Paul Maurice story too. At Halifax Mooseheads games, I mean, I used to love watching them for one. So the building is always packed. Like this is like 5,000-6,000 people. So when Nick Ehlers was playing with the Halifax Mooseheads, it would happen every game. Honestly, Ken, it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So Ehlers would grab the puck behind his own net, and you know the wheels. And this is junior hockey, so he's dusting guys. Like a couple strides and see you later, right? Roadrunner. He's weaving through guys, and as he's accelerating, you have 7,000, 6,000, however many people were in the rink, all chanting at the same time. Nick, 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 and it gets louder and louder and more aggressive. By the time he's gets to the net, it's like hits this heightened crescendo. Honestly, it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen at any hockey game. The way Halifax fans used to chant for Nick Ehlers. I got a lot of time for him. So Elliot and I, when we were at the NHL Car Wash a couple of years ago in Chicago, we sat down with Ehlers, and we asked him about, that summer there was all the rumors that, remember he's going to Boston. Boston's looking for a winger. Ehlers is going to Boston. Like it's done. It's going to happen. And we asked him if he heard all those rumors, and he said absolutely. He was home, but he got all of his friends calling him and texting him and saying, like, hey, we hear you're going to be a Bruin, etc. And he said, like, how do you can't not be affected by that? And he seemed to have a real chip on his shoulder. And athletes, when they get a chip on their shoulder, like generally the game is going to the next level. And we started to see that starting last season with Nick Ehlers. There was like a defiant streak to Nick Ehlers. I love him. Like I got all the time in the world for Nick Ehlers. Quick Paul Maurice story when he's talking about fast hockey players. So I remember talking to Paul. This would have been, I think he was still coaching the Maple Leafs at this point. And we're downtown somewhere in Toronto. And I said, what was your welcome to the NHL moment? Like, when did you realize, whoa, like as a coach here, like when did you realize, holy smokes, these athletes are next level? And he said it was coaching, would have been Hartford. And he said he called all the guys to the circle. First practice, blow the whistle, all the guys come in and sort of talked to them about what the practice was going to be like. And he said, I blew the whistle for like a hard lap, boys, like 1 or 2 laps. He said he blew the whistle and he said, Sami Kapanen took off like a ball shot out of a cannon. He said it was the fastest thing he had ever seen on ice in his entire life. And he said he kind of stood there stunned, like, what was that? So he said, Sami Kapanen. Whenever I hear him talk about Nikolai Ehlers, I'll always remember like his welcome to the NHL, like you're not in Kansas anymore moment, involves Sami Kapanen and watching his burst. I can only imagine what goes through his mind when he sees like this next level Nick Ehlers. And I still maintain Connor McDavid is the fastest player in the league with the puck on his stick, period. I don't know if that's true in a straight line though. And man, I would love to find that. Like, wouldn't you love to see a straight line race between Nick Ehlers and Connor McDavid?
Marek's calling it on pay-per-view. Let's do it right now.
The ideas are flowing today, man. I hope there's producers out there watching right now because there's a lot here. Jeff, I've been such an admirer of yours on we're in this ever evolving, changing industry, and I think you've always done a real good job of being kind of at the front end of that. And I'm going to hand a question over to one of our viewers here who, you'll have a lot of fans out there who are a big fan of the podcast that you did with Wish. Says you had such a great run. Did you think it would last, and do you still keep up with the guy?
Still talk to Greg every now and then. We just sort of exchange texts. When ESPN, got the rights stateside a few weeks ago, I sent him a note just saying, hey, I hope this means good things for you and great things for Emily as well. So we still keep in touch. I did not think it would last longer than a couple of weeks, to be honest with you. And the whole thing came together. Greg was doing a radio show on the Score with who was he doing it with at that point? I can't remember. So he's doing a radio show at the Score, and it had come to a conclusion. I was working at CBC doing Hockey Night in Canada radio daily on Sirius XM, or just Sirius at that point, and that had come to an end. And I was just joining Sportsnet to do television. And I'm someone that craves the discipline of doing something every single day. Like I need that in my life. I need that consistency. And so we're just having a conversation. Like, and it was turned into one of those, your chocolate's in my peanut butter. Hey, we're in the same place kind of moments where we both said, so your radio show got canceled. You've gone to a new company over here and you don't have something to do daily. There's a thing in the world now called podcasts. Why don't we see if we can get Yahoo and Rogers together on creating a podcast and, you know, doing it as sort of a co-venture between your company and my company. And honestly, I had no idea that this would have the legs that it did, and that we'd get the audience that we did. And to your original point, Sean, about sort of being at the forefront of a lot of this stuff, what I've always felt is, and this is actually more strategy, to be honest with you, than anything else. I've always found that when you get a job, if you do enough things in enough different departments, it makes you really difficult to get fired. Like, okay, if we turf Marek, okay, well, he just does television. No, but if you do digital and radio and, then all of a sudden you're affecting too many departments. It's always would have been a job security issue with me as much as anything else. I kind of say tongue in cheek. I love that podcast. That was fun. Made some great friends that I still have to this day. Patrick from NHL Ties. Remember that account? Remember NHL Ties?
Yes.
So I still talk to Patrick. He's got a young son now, building a new house. He lives in Seattle. Wonderful guy. So keep in touch with him. There's people all over. Karen in Edmonton. There's people all over the place that I count as friends now because of that wonderful, goofy, stupid podcast.
What, Jeff, what intrigues you most about the North, and what's it going to mean when those teams finally have to face teams outside of their Canadian bubble when the playoffs advance?
That's a great question. I don't know. Like, I don't know what that's going to be like, and no one does. And I think that's part of the intrigue that goes into it. It's just kind of one of the reasons why international hockey doesn't hold. I know I'm stretching for this metaphor here, but why international hockey really doesn't hold a lot of intrigue for a lot of fans of the NHL, because all it is hockey players with just different jerseys, but it's all the same players. Now, the World Juniors, the U18, that's different because there's the era of mystery. We don't know, who these players are or what it's all about. Much like this way, this season specifically, we don't. Winnipeg plays Colorado. Who's better? I don't know. And anyone that tells you otherwise is lying.
Yeah.
And you can call anyone out on your show. Marek, if he said, "Oh yeah, I think that the Caps would dust the Oilers," you don't know that. And Marek says you're a liar. Nobody knows. We have no clue. And to me, that's part of the intrigue that goes into this edition of the playoffs.
Jeff, one of the things I think is really special about you, and I think you showed it here today in talking with us, is when I watch you on broadcasts, there's something about you that leaves me, after watching you, feeling inspired. I think you showed that in spades today. There's just something about you. Got a great outlook. I think there was a lot of good advice here. I've been writing down notes because I'm thinking, man, I got to get my career together here and be more like Jeff.
Listen, there's a great old saying, Sean, the key to all of it is sincerity. Once you learn how to fake that, you got it made.
Excellent, Jeff. Hey, we really appreciate you doing this. I know you had a grind of a week. Ken was saying that such a grind that you almost forgot that you would agree to be.
I saw Ken's note on Twitter this morning when I woke up, opened up, and there's Ken's note like, oh yeah, that's right. So I apologize.
Well,
I apologize for the coffee shop look you're getting this morning. Look at these feathers.
Did you see what your partner Elliot Friedman looked like when he was on the show? We should send you the. I texted him the night before. I texted him the night before, and I said, listen, it's a casual affair. You don't need to worry about dressing up. And he said, you'll be lucky if I do my hair for it. And I said, I dare you. And then sure enough, he showed up the next day. It was everywhere. Great stuff.
I love what Elliot's going for, by the way, whether it was the beard before, whether it was the mustache before, all of it. And now with the feathers.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, Frege is a really forward-thinking guy. I know what he's doing here. I get it. He is actually, in his own way, doing this for all of us. Okay.
Hey, so why do you think I got this now?
Moving this all forward, wearing the turtleneck. He's the guy taking the hits. He's the guy that's going to get roasted on Twitter. He's the guy that's going to hear it from everybody. He's the guy that's going to have the pieces written about him. He is doing this for all of us. right? So the next person shows up with long hair or a turtleneck. Kenny Reed's a staple for Kenny Reed now on Central. Kenny's got it. He's got the turtle. Elliot opened the door. I know why he's doing this. He's doing this to make it easier for all of us. That's what Elliot's doing.
He's showing his range. Not only is he, the top insider in the game, he's a style maven as well. It's phenomenal stuff. Jeff, really appreciate you making the time. It was an education, my friend. I really appreciate this.
Anytime.
Would love to have you on in the future if you'd be willing to come on again. It's been a great half hour. Appreciate your time.
I promise you won't get this, whatever this thing I have on my head is. I'll clean up the act next time, gentlemen. Sorry, I made my collared shirt.
Excellent stuff, Jeff. Appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next time. And let's get right into bringing in our next guy, Sami Cosentino. And Sami, I think you've been hearing us here. I got to say, I'm a little disappointed because you and I, we were talking about flow. You heard right before that. You and I have been admirers of each other's hair from afar. And you don't pop out the hair? Come on, you got to let it flow. You got to let it flow, my friend. Here we go.
Jeffy going.
There we go. I love it. Let it ride. Let it ride. We have the best hair guests on this show.
It's so cold here in Ontario, so we got to go with the toque.
Sami, we were talking earlier at the beginning of the show. You and Ken share this love of both baseball and hockey. So I joke that we're going to get a lot of explanations about hockey players through baseball analogies because you guys are the kings at doing that. But give our viewers a little bit of a backstory into why your baseball roots are so strong.
87, 16 years old, got hired by the Blue Jays to work as a ball boy / bat boy for the visiting teams at Exhibition Stadium. So I was 10 years into the Blue Jays tenure. So my job basically was to, at that time in Exhibition Stadium, the bullpens were inside the field of play down the left and right field lines. The visiting clubhouse was on the first base side. And so I'd sit it was literally like a bench in basically right center field, with the row of fans right behind you. And I'd sit at the end of the bench, and whenever a foul ball came down there, I'd take the ball and I'd throw it back into play because at that time, Major League Baseball didn't feel it needed to serve its fans. And the other element of that job was the catcher would have his back to me. And so I'd get probably about 110 feet down the right field line. And any foul balls that were ripped down that right field line, I'd have to stop to protect the catcher who had his back to the field of play as the bullpen pitcher was warming up. So then it started from there. In 1990, I got a baseball scholarship, not a full ride, but about a half ride to a place called Spring Arbor College in Michigan. Played baseball there for 4 years, played in 2 NAIA World Series, 91, 92. And then I came out of there and I was teaching baseball with a friend of mine, Danny Burney, who still runs Pro Teach Baseball, played in the Red Sox organization for a little while. Really amazing teacher, a guy who I think Joey Votto would say has been pretty, Joey would give credit to for helping him along the way. And then in late April of 95, when baseball came back to work, the Blue Jays needed people to fulfill a need to work in their clubhouse. And as it turns out, the guy I worked for ended up getting fired. So I ran the visiting clubhouse for about 2 months down the stretch in 95. So in 96, I wanted to go work on the home side. So Jeff Ross, the equipment manager at the time, Kevin Malloy, who's still with the club now, hired me as basically the third assistant clubhouse / equipment manager. And so I flipped over to the home side. And that was kind of cool because you could forge some relationships. It allowed me to go and work spring training and then come home and work all the home games. And so that lasted until 2002. But in 99, I started to morph into the broadcast side, which is where I got my degree at Spring Arbor. And then I felt like I was, I guess took a bit of a leap of faith that the broadcasting thing would work out for me. And I left the Blue Jays in 02. Canadian Baseball League called their games in 03. Expos games in 04. And then I think it was 05 or 06 where I started as the third guy on the broadcast team for the Jays. So it's a long baseball history there. And that's kind of where it all came about. But starting as a ball boy in the right field line in Exhibition Stadium in 87.
Love that. I mean, you know how much I love the Jays, Sami. But
yeah.
Also, too, a big part of my childhood going to my grandma and grandpa's on Saturdays, listening to Dave Van Horn on those games on the weekend. Yeah. I mean, we'll get to the Jays in a second, but what was it like to be part of that surreal experience in Montreal?
surreal is probably the best way to put it. So we had it was a 25 game schedule that turned into maybe 30 games. And for the most part, it was to be done remotely, which, if you go back and look at that time, you'd think, wow, it's crazy. And now that's become the norm in our business because of the pandemic. So what happened, Weber, is I basically had a choice of who I could pick to be my color broadcast partner. And the expectation was, and everyone knew this going in, that we do most of the games by remote, but we get into Montreal to do some home games there too. So Warren Cromartie was the guy. He was living in Florida at the time. And so Crow's like, yeah, I'm all in. Any chance I get to go to Montreal, la, 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 la. Awesome. Well, I don't think he quite realized that we weren't going to Montreal and doing all the games. So the night before our first game, he pulled the plug. He's like, what? What do you mean you're flying me to Toronto? This is an Expos game. It's supposed to be going to Montreal. So he pulled the plug on it. And he's like, this isn't what I signed up for, la, la, la. Well, we begged to differ over what he was told and so on. So now we were left scrambling a little bit. Tommy Volk, who was the president of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame at the time, he's a guy I got to know quite well through the Canadian Baseball League stuff. Darren Fletcher was a good friend of mine through our tenures together with the Blue Jays. And Rance Molinex, although I wasn't really around for much of his tenure, we became friends and golfed a little bit here and there and whatever else. So we kind of rotated between those three guys for the games. But the surreal part of it is that the second you showed up in Montreal, it was just like doomsday because everyone knew the team was leaving. It was awful. And literally, like, people who had been part of the furniture there at the Big O knew that their tenure was coming to an end. And they wanted to just milk every second of being there, being in the building, experiencing the fans, the games. So it was really quite sad. And I think about a lot of people who worked there, some of them since the inception of the franchise, and just really had the rug pulled from underneath them just like that. And the guy at the time who was looking after things was a guy by the name of Tony Tavares. And he had some experience, I think, in hockey with the Anaheim Ducks through Disney. It was kind of like, he's probably still around, but he's kind of like that, almost like that big mouth, arrogant, kind of American cocky guy. And I remember approaching him saying, hey, you know what, when this thing goes to Washington, I'd like to be considered for a job to move to Washington. This is a great gig. And so it took him about probably 38 seconds to blow me off. And after reaching out to him a couple of times, I knew that dream was going to be dead in the water. And part of it was probably because it was cross-border and whatever else. But I didn't think, for the job that I did, not that I did a great job, it was only 30 games, but I felt it deserved at least the respect of an answer to say, hey, you can't do this. It's an impossibility. Forget it, kid. You don't know what the hell you're doing, whatever. And it never got that. And so for this day, I always think about that guy and just saying, hey, you could have handled a lot better than that. And of course, there was a lot on his plate, so on and so forth. And I was just a small part of it. But I believe in treating people with respect. And I didn't feel any kind of respect at all coming back that way. What the cool thing is, guys, I got to tell you about that. As part of that surreal experience you talked about, Weber, Frank Robinson was the manager. Okay. So back in my days in the clubhouse and the visiting side, Frank was managing Baltimore at the time. Okay. And so for whatever reason, he was kind of a crotchety guy, but we found a way to really get along well. And I remember when I was playing baseball in Spring Arbor, at that time, Baltimore was training in Fort Lauderdale. So I took a couple of the guys that I knew and I said, you know what? I see Baltimore's playing, against the Yanks. They were in Fort Lauderdale at the time. Based on this and that, they'll probably be back to the ballpark, on the bus at whatever time. So I drove a couple of my buddies over there. And sure enough, Cal Ripken, Billy Ripken, Greg Olson, all the guys that I got to know really well from my visiting days were all coming off the bus. And Frank was there too. And so Frank invited me and my couple of buddies into his office as they were getting changed and getting ready to go home or whatever else. So that was a real thrilling experience. But Frank and I always kind of had that little bit of a bond. So visiting clubhouse when he managed, this little stint at spring training where we were also down training. And then, of course, I get to the Expos and he's kind of looking at me and it had been a few years. He's like, oh, I remember you little, and he'd use some sort of word. And I said, no, you're stuck with me again for at least 30 games. And so he was nice enough to grant me an interview, and I really like to unearth this interview because it got really emotional about the days that he spent and the times that he had, all the racist things that were going on against him and the things that he fought through. And I remember thinking, wow, this is unbelievable that we can get this out there. Now think, this is going back to like 04, 05 or whatever it was. And so that was one of the really cool part of the surreal experiences. And the last part, and not to keep yapping here, guys, but like people were so pissed in Montreal. The last game that we called at home against Florida, it must have stopped 4 or 5 times because people were throwing golf balls on the field. They were raucous. They were pissed right off. And when it actually did, Frank had to actually go on the mic and say, hey, if this keeps happening, we're going to have to close this game out and be done with it. And we're going to have to forfeit. So people stopped. Game ended. Weak fly ball left side. It was Mike Mordecai who caught the final out. And the surreal part of that experience was people wouldn't leave their seats. They had been so entrenched in the game and they loved the game so much. They never left. They didn't leave their seats. They literally a lot of them had to be dragged out by security or asked politely to leave by security. And there was people crying. They were trying to unscrew seats. And so that was probably the most surreal part of it. Whereas like you knew it was coming to an end. But at that point, that last home game, everyone knew this was done. We might never ever see Major League Baseball again.
Sammy, you talking about those relationships gets me thinking. You and I had the pleasure of working at World Juniors in Montreal a couple of years back. One of the funnest experiences I've had in this industry. I'll say this. I've seen a lot of people do it really well. I've never seen anyone work a room more effortlessly than you do. It's poetry in motion. And and I wonder your time kind of behind, inside the Golden Gates when you worked with and alongside ball players. I think about other guys like, Arash Madani, who's great in our industry. Yeah. And even a guy like Gary Lawless, who Winnipeggers will know, who started out in PR and interacting with the players. What did you learn from being on that side of things that you were able to take into journalism and create the relationships that you so effortlessly create with the athletes that you deal with?
Really, really kind of you to say that. And then I take pride in that part of it. I think the number one rule is to be a nice person. And in baseball, you experience everyone from the biggest prick to the nicest person in the world. And I think about, it was part of the reason why I wanted to move from the visiting clubhouse into the home side, is because I wanted an opportunity to create relationships and bonds and friendships. And, I had my 50th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and my wife was able to, through some connections in a Zoom call, Carlos Delgado showed up. We're still friends today. Sean Green showed up on a Zoom call. Pat Henkin, Darren Fletcher. I talked to Paul Control 3 or 4 days ago. Dan Plesac and I are in contact through text all the time. And so it was really about building those relationships. And it was funny because I was the guy washing jocks, folding towels, picking up laundry after games. Yet I was also the same guy that you could sit down and have a beer with or go play golf with or go have dinner with. And, I prided myself on the fact that I could sit next to a guy making $10 million a year while I'm making $12 an hour. And we could talk on a lot of things on the same level. So I prided myself in doing that. I think working in baseball, though, especially on the visiting side, when you saw a lot of mean people and a lot of real arrogant people, it made me think to myself, I don't ever want to be like that, whether I'm in a position to be or not. I never want to be that guy. I want to try and be a nice person and be good to people and be social and network and have fun. And, if you need to call on someone for information, that they'll trust you and that sort of thing. So that's really where it started, is probably seeing a lot of the bad that went on. I think about Buck Showalter. It was so overprotective, and my God, he'd come in and he'd want the lock changed on his manager's door, and he'd want a certain seat that he'd have to sit in, and he'd want to show up like hours and hours before anyone would even think about entering the building for a day of a game. And I think about a guy like Bill Buckner, who was just so miserable. And so I looked at some of those people. I'm like, guys, you're missing the boat here, man. Like, you're coming to the ballpark every day for work. You're making tons of money. Like, what could honestly be better than this? And I always thought that about my job, Weber. You know that. I like my job with the Jays. It was amazing. It was the time of my life. Really, it was. Now, obviously, the times are a lot different now, but it was really just about seeing a lot of the bad, Sean, and saying, I never want to be that. But it was also a lot about, Bob Elliott is a guy I think about all the time, and he called the other day, and I got to call him back actually. But Bob was like, we used to call him Whispering Bob, and he'd be there like every time you look, you turn around and Bob would be standing there. Hey, Sammy, about a Diet Coke. Hey, Sammy, a Diet Coke. And so he'd slip you $1 for a Diet Coke. We're in spring training. I'm like, Bob, you're not gonna give me a freaking $1 for a Diet Coke. Just take the Diet Coke. You've been around 100 years. You're gonna be a Hall of Famer. Like, take the damn Diet Coke. But Bobby was amazing because he'd just hover and he'd hang around. You're like, what the hell is this guy doing? And next thing you know, you'd look in the corner and you'd have some guy kind of pinned up against the wall for half hour, 30, 40 minutes. And you're like, okay, I'm going to read tomorrow what Bob's going to write about this conversation. And you wouldn't see it. And then you wouldn't see it the next day. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what are you doing? You just shooting the breeze or what? And then 2 or 3 weeks later, when everything's been separated and no one realized that conversation took place, what Bob was talking about would eventually end up in an article. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, man, this guy has he's doing it on the sly. He obviously has the respect of everybody. People are telling him stuff probably way more than they should. And he's found a way to manage and manipulate that. And so from a media perspective, Sean, and how that transfers is you're watching a guy like Bob go to work and really just be amazing at his craft. Dan Shulman was the same thing. Buck Martinez, I mean, he was able to do it because he played and he managed and he's experienced it at every level. But watching the pros do their work that way and be able to extract information and not always use it right away, like you get so excited about getting this great information and we're all in that situation, like, oh, I got to use it. And you're like, oh, hang back. Well, a time will come when no one will get thrown under the bus for using really good and sacred information. So it was about watching the bad people. And it was about watching the pros really go about their work in a way in which elicited the best information.
Yeah, Bob Elliott, one of the great human beings, a Hall of Fame writer and Hall of Fame person. And when I was covering the Manitoba Moose, kind of had an opportunity to spend some time with Bob, and he's just a great influence, and had a couple of meals with him, and he's just such a great person. And I got the nickname of Bonus Round around here sometimes too, because I adopted his lurking philosophy, and it's not always the favorite of the media relations staff, as they like to remind me of, but it's so important when it comes to fostering relationships and all of those things. Sam, we know your passion for baseball, but where does your passion for hockey come from, and how did you get down that path on the junior hockey side of things?
It started on local Rogers broadcasts. So for those who aren't based in Ontario, Rogers Community TV, which is really available only in that small area, would have games. And I thought, well, this is going to be maybe the easiest way and the best way for me to get into broadcasting. So I always tell people, like, the path that you take to get to where you want to go isn't always a straight line. And I wanted to be in baseball, but it was a far jump from graduating college with a broadcasting degree to think you're going to get a major league job. So back in it was late 90s, I started doing games locally with Rogers. Well, the play-by-play jobs were taken, which is really what I wanted to do. And at times the color job would be open. So I'm like, all right, I'll just hop into that seat. I'm getting reps. Awesome. And sometimes the hosting job would be open. So I worked in Mississauga, I worked in Brampton, did some stuff in Barrie as well. And then eventually I turned into working with Dan Dunleavy, who's now the play-by-play voice for the Buffalo Sabres. We worked in downtown Toronto together for the Toronto St. Michael's Majors, and then it extended back out to Mississauga. So just being around the OHL and being around really good people. Johnny Abbott worked with us in some of those games, Johnny out in Vancouver there. So it's amazing to see how far some of those people have come. Dave Cameron was coaching. He coached in Mississauga and Toronto. So you run into all these people that you're seeing years down the road. Bobby Jones is now in Vegas, or who's now he's in Vegas in Ottawa with DJ. And that's how it started. And then I got comfortable just being the color guy, and that's kind of where the niche came from, and it worked out from there. And I got a break at Sportsnet because of Dan Dunleavy, doing a game way back when, and Deb Sanderson ended up hiring me for the 05-06 season, and kind of just went from there.
Sammy, I wanted your take on this. Excuse me, because we've been talking about this, and it almost seems like this year, with the way COVID has affected everything and how it's going to affect scouting players and drafting players, there's almost a little bit of an idea that, the draft pick, excuse me, is somewhat disrespected this year. And maybe not disrespected is the right word, but that it's a little bit more of a crapshoot than it has been in years past because of the scouting and, the inability maybe to do it. It's got to affect you in your job. And I'm wondering if you think this is going to be a draft based on what what you've been able to pick up. One, I want to know how hard it's been for you to kind of get a gauge on this year's draft. And two, if you think that's going to lead to a year of drafts that are going to be, potentially big swings and misses and then big finding diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, it's really difficult because you're watching video. And for me, I never pretend to be a scout. But when I talk to a lot of the guys, they're traveling to Europe and they've been, in the USHL and so on and so forth. So they have context. If Matt Coronado's playing for Chicago in USHL, they got a rock star team who scored a million goals and they're up against, I don't know, Sioux Falls, let's say, or whatever. They have context as to who's playing for Sioux Falls, who some of the matchups are. So when Coronado's going down the wing and he burns a defenseman, they have an idea of that. Is that because of a good matchup, or is that guy a good defenseman that they just beat? Same thing when it goes to Europe. You're looking at the under 20 leagues in Finland or in Sweden. I don't have that context. So really, I just focus on the player and what you can from a video screen and try and discern what skills they're good at based on watching video. So it's extremely difficult. But there's a lot of things that I think are going to come out of it. First of all, you always want to go with what you know. So my guess is, especially after the first round, when there is some sort of predictability and certainty based on having watched these guys internationally as underagers and so on and so forth, you should have a decent book on them. But I do think you're going to see more redrafts entered. I think you're going to see more people taking swings on goalies. Maybe even in the first round, Sebastian Cossa comes to mind as a way to say, well, if it's going to be uncertain, then let's play the uncertain game. I think you're going to see and I think we saw it already, Toronto had no problem. Let's get rid of my 2021 and maybe even our 22 picks. Who cares? Because we're not interested in those players. And when you go back and look at Toronto's draft from last year, I think 3 Americans, 3 Finns, 3 Russians, if I'm not mistaken. And so at that point, it's like, okay, if you're doing that, you're saying, we want to take guys who are playing and who are developing and so on and so forth. So I definitely think there was strategy behind it. But in the grand scheme of things, some people are going to come back maybe from the ownership level and say, yeah, I told you we could scout this draft on video. You don't need to be traveling all over the place. We're going to cut our budgets. The flip side of that is the teams that do it and do it really well are going to say, I told you so. All this move to analytics and video it pales in comparison to what we can see by being live and in person. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, your best scouting staffs are going to be able to marry those things. And I think the best approach is you see it with your own eyes in person as many times as you can. You go to the analytics side of things. You try and corroborate what you saw with your eyes with the analytics. And if those things disagree with one another, now you have the discussion room. And then you want to try and add in the character part of it. That's one thing that analytics will never be able to tell you is the character side of things. So if you're looking at a guy like Josh Hosang, who, 2014 was drafted in the first round and still having trouble making his way, there were a lot of signs at that time that said Josh Hosang might be an issue for your club moving forward. And that's not to pick on Josh, but his history has sort of repeated itself and hasn't been able to find a full-time job in the NHL. So characters become a huge part of it. And that also means that you're there or you're in person, you're talking to people. You can't get the same from a character perspective over a Zoom call or a FaceTime or whatever else. I don't care what you say. Body language, someone who shakes your hand, looking in the eyes, whatever else. Those things are all super important. So at the end of it, I think it changes in the fact that we start to really appreciate that old school in person, whether it's watching or meeting, a lot more than we probably did before this as we started to see the shift between video and analytics.
We'll get to the Jets in a moment, Sam, but just curious for your take. Obviously, some tough news with the Memorial Cup, and also for those folks who'll be tuning into the U18s, what are they going to see from Connor Bedard, and how impressed have you been by what he was able to do in that short span in the bubble with the Regina Pats?
Well,
as a 15-year-old.
Amazing. Because as you know, Weber and Sean, you don't see many 15-year-olds get the opportunity other than in an AP situation. That's kind of mop-up time at the end of the year, or maybe when a team swings through that particular player's hometown, they can get in for a couple of games. It starts for me with the approach that the Western Hockey League has taken. They've taken this 24-game schedule and they said, this is a developmental year for us. And if you look across the league, they're playing their younger guys. You're seeing some unbelievable 04s, unbelievable 05s, and even some of the 03s for this year's draft really getting a lot of playing time, which isn't typical in the Western Hockey League. And it's the perfect time to take advantage of that because for the most part, you're in a bubble or a protected environment. Your travel is mitigated. So some of those younger guys who might have issues with travel and marrying the travel in school, that's mitigated because you're either only playing in division or in a bubble. And then you look at the situation that you're playing against a lot of the same teams over and over again. So when it comes to Bedard, those three things married with the fact that in his lead up year to his first year, his exceptional year, he's had more time to train than the six before him because of all that time off. So he comes in a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit more well refined. Of course, he gets the opportunity to go over in Sweden and practice a little bit and see what things are like over there. And like, it's not that huge big eye-opening thing when he straps it on for his first WHL game. So I think the situation has been perfect for him. You still have to go out and do it, and to do it at the pace that he did it before leaving for the under 18s is it's unbelievable. I can't wait to watch this guy, see how he's used there, see if he can work his way up the lineup. But it says a lot to me when you're taking an 05 in a year where it's really valuable for those 03s to get the opportunity to strut their stuff for the scouts. But it tells me that Alan Miller thought, hey, you know what? This guy is going to be the guy that makes our team better, so we're going with him. So good on him for making that decision. Good on Connor Bedard for earning it.
Ken, I'm going to jump to the Jets question. Just I'm always interested, Sammy, if when you've scouted guys at the junior level and you see them move up into the AHL, how much you pay attention to the transfer and trying to reinforce the things that you thought that they were going to become, how much you follow. Interesting here for us. We'd love to get your thoughts on Cole Perfetti. And because, I mean, I'll tell you this right now, a lot of journalists I find, you know, when their team drafts a guy or picks up a guy, they'll go and quickly search the internet and find some scouting report and spit that scouting report out like they know that. I'm going to be the first one to tell you, I don't cover that beat, so I can't tell you a lot about those guys. You're my first call every time the Jets go pick up a guy like that. And I gave you a call about Cole Perfetti after they picked him up. And I mean, I'm not going to steal the words out of your mouth, but I came away from that conversation thinking this kid's the real deal. What did you see from him when you scouted him, and how much have you paid attention to how he's transferred to the AHL level?
I think Winnipeg was pretty shocked to get him at 10. You guys would be able to speak to that more than me. Yeah. I had him going to Detroit because I just thought there was so much synergy there. You get Steve Yzerman in his backyard. You got Chris Osgood and Jimmy DeVilano, part owners of the Saginaw Spirit. You got, you know, a guy who trains with Chris Draper's personal trainer. So for me, it just all day long, it looked like Perfetti was going to go to Detroit. And maybe because that got out there, maybe Steve Yzerman said, no, we're not going to do that. Although Lucas Raymond is going to be an amazing player. The first thing for me when it comes to Cole is the character. Like, he is mature but beyond his years. And that, you know, whether it's charitable efforts, whether it's speaking to the media, whether it's how he deals with his billet family, which I got to see firsthand, he's extremely mature for his age. And so you go back and you're saying, all right, well, we got the character. That's a massive check mark. We're not going to worry about that. He's going to do what he has to do. And then you look at him, and at the time, you know, back-to-back, I think 37 goal seasons in the OHL, and you're like, wow, he can really put the puck in the net. But his greatest asset is his ability to make plays. You know, stop at the line, assess what's coming, trailer, get the puck in deep, hang on to it, wait, be patient, so on and so forth. And so, you know, his translated to the point now, last I looked was a couple of days ago, I think he had 16 points in 20-some games, and then he had back-to-back 2 assist games, and I think a third multi-point game in a row, if I'm not mistaken. So that's putting him, I think, in the top 15 in AHL rookie scoring. And that doesn't surprise me one bit. What I think he needed to learn was just pacing the game a little better. He could control it whatever way he wanted to in junior. Obviously, you don't have that option in the NHL. So the AHL has probably been really, really good for him to teach him about playing with pace. But I honestly think he's going to be a better producer at the NHL than he will be even in the American League. I think when he gets with better players, his ability, his playmaking ability is really going to come to the fore. And guys who might not expect it in the American League or in the OHL, and no disrespect to the American League, those guys are able to take those passes that are a little bit in the feet, a little bit further beyond, in a hole where you're not maybe expecting to get the puck. Cole's going to be able to find and do all of those things. And I think people are going to be really, really impressed by him when they get the chance to play with him, as long as he can, play up to pace. You're going to talk about skating with Wheeler or Ehlers or those types of guys. There's no time to be just hanging around the blue line. You got to make your decision to make it quickly. So I think that's something that's really he'll probably make his mark more as a playmaker, in my opinion, before he will as a goal scorer, where in junior it was the other way around.
Sure, Sam. And for our folks watching and listening, you spent a day with him, right? This sounds crazy during COVID times, at a time where you got to know the person and observe. What stood out most about that meeting, if you will?
Sorry, a little bit of distraction here. Let me close the door. Sorry. It's a circus here.
It's COVID times. COVID times, baby.
Oh my God. So spending that day with Cole was like, it was crazy. Like, the billet setup he had there was off the charts. Outdoor rink, mini Zamboni, really nice home, kind of out in the country, maybe 10, 15 minutes away from the rink. But they really gave him a lot of autonomy there. And the one thing was, the billet home, the Bordeaux family, they wanted no part of having someone live in their home. They have very good connections with a lot of those old Detroit Red Wings and, with Osgood or Maltby and those types of guys. But they wanted no part of having a billet. And so in order for it to sort of work out, they convinced the Bordeaux family to take Cole as a billet. They have a couple of young kids. And as it turned out, it was a match made in heaven, because Cole became essentially that older brother, that go-between between the dad and the young son. And so they were playing hockey and basketball and doing stuff like all the time. And it enabled Cole to get out more out on the rink, in the backyard rink. And it really helped the son. And the mother and father were like, wow, we never imagined that having some stranger in our house could actually turn out to be this good. And so they saw the same sort of characteristic traits that everyone in scouting saw when it came to Cole. And then just kind of watching him go through the day-to-day, we were like, these first-round picks are taxed with a lot of things outside of just going to school and going to the rink. So that morning we got up, he made himself a healthy breakfast, a smoothie, hopped in the car, went to school, took a couple classes. Then later we saw him in the rink. At the rink, they went through all their video meetings, which they let us sit in, was awesome. Gave us free access to their entire dressing room in Saginaw, which you would never believe how nice it is there. It's one of the best dressing rooms I've ever been, like unreal. So then they're having lunch at the rink. Then they're going on the ice. They're skating. A couple guys talk about him. Goes back home, has a bite to eat. Hops on the outdoor rink with his billet brother. They do some stuff. Picks up that. Ends up going to the local hospital for a charitable thing where they were trying to raise these video game consoles for kids that were in the hospital so that they could have something to do while they were there. And then I think by that time it was about 8 or 8:30 at night. He probably went back, took another spin on the outdoor rink, and then, into the wrapper after that. So it was pretty neat to see, like, we just think of these guys and see him on the ice, and, he's an awesome player. He's a first round pick, but holy smokes, like everything that goes into just one day amazed me, and how someone 17 years old could handle all that was simply amazing to me.
Sammy, I know you pointed it out and you said, I'm not a scout, but I've seen your handiwork far too often on draft day to not for a second buy into the fact you don't know far more than the average bear when it comes to what's going to happen with these players. I'm wondering, you've got to have a good story somewhere along the line of like what your best find was, like that player that you went and said, this guy's going to be really good, and I don't think people are giving him the credit he's due. What's your best pull in that regard, and finding the guy that you thought was going to be special that maybe other people weren't as high on?
Well, one guy that we're watching a lot now, and it's just two guys in Chicago. So I thought the world of Alex DeBrincat. I thought, like, wow, the way this guy shoots the puck and the way he plays with some jam and some bite, like I think he can do this at the next level. And I think I had him going in the first round that year, and I think he went 34th to Chicago or whatever else. And it's amazing how a guy at that size, the exact same skill he had in Erie, has perfectly translated to the NHL. Like I would think, guys, and you guys are watching a lot more NHL hockey than I am, but I'd put him in the top 15 pure goal scorers in the National Hockey League. Tell me if I'm wrong there.
No, I think you're onto something.
I think it's pretty fair, yeah.
So maybe top 20. But
no, I was 15 to 20 for sure. Yeah, I am with you.
Yeah,
he's a great finisher.
It's crazy how he's able to do it, and he did all that in junior hockey. And I'm like, he's too small. He's not going to do it. So I think we're going to start to see that again with Cole Caulfield. I believe that they're a very similar ilk. We'll see what happens with Cole. But the other guy in Chicago that I absolutely loved when I watched him play, and he played with a lot of bite and nastiness game, is Brandon Hagel. He played for Red Deer. He actually got drafted by Buffalo, I think in the 5th or 6th round, and they never ended up signing him. So then he signs with Chicago. And whatever circumstance, them getting younger, whatever else, he's doing some of the same things too. He's playing with a meanness to him. He's getting to the net. He's, I don't know, 6 or 7 goals. Like really, really awesome stuff. I guess the other kind of one draft story was Pierre-Luc Dubois. I projected that he was going to go to 3rd to Columbus that year. Everyone thought I was nuts. You don't know what you're talking about. Puljujärvi's the guy, la la la. And when it happened, I think a lot of people were very surprised about that happening. But when you look in the grand scheme of things, it's funny because there's a lot of guys you think they're just going to be awesome. I thought Zach Fucale by now would be a guy who I thought was going to be a star in the National Hockey League. It hasn't quite worked out that way for him yet. I still think there's more ramp for him. And then you look at some other guys, and like, talk a lot about the character and a guy who's going to be able to will his way. Tanner Jeannot got into a game with Nashville this year. I watched him playing in Moose Jaw quite a bit, and you're like, my God, this guy, just by his work ethic alone, someone should just give him a chance. And whether he plays another second again, I think that's a huge thing for a guy who wasn't nearly as skilled as everyone else, wasn't nearly as fast as anyone else, but just worked his tail off to be able to get to where he is. So I don't know, like, I think DeBrincat's probably the guy who's probably had the most impact, where I thought, I think he is going to be able to do it at the next level.
Obviously, Ville Heinola is a guy we've talked a lot about here this week. But sorry, since you mentioned Dubois, I mean, what stood out about Dubois? I mean, some fans have been a little bit impatient in terms of Dubois' impact with the Jets so far. But what stood out to you about his time as a junior player? Because I was able to speak to his coaches at both stops, and came away with a lot of insight gleaned from those coaches' impressions of him. What stood out to you, and why did you think he would go that high?
Well, a tough guy, a physical guy, skilled guy, hockey background, of decent character. On the line he played in Cape Breton, he played with 2 Russian players. One of them was Svechnikov's brother, Evgeny, and the other was a really skilled guy. His name escapes me right now. Lazarev, might have been Lazarev. Anyways, when you saw his ability to be able to play with guys who are really skilled, all those things went into the pot, and I thought, you know what, everything makes sense for this guy to be, definitely a first-round pick and a high first-round pick. But I think with Pierre-Luc Dubois, sometimes when you're drafted that high, it's automatically the default is to say, all right, he's a 100-point guy. He's 3rd overall. He's a 100-point guy. I don't think Pierre-Luc Dubois is ever going to be a 100-point guy. But I think if you watch him over the long term, how smart he is, physicality he brings to the table, the ability to play wing or center and win some draws, and play a full brand, I guess, if you will, or the 200-foot player is what people like to say. I think those things that watched over the long term are going to make you really appreciate what he brings to the table. Now, is he a 50, 60, 80 point guy? He's probably more along those lines. But with his size and his ability to shoot the puck, and go to the net, 25 goals should be in his sights each and every year. So I think very highly of the player. But to think that you're getting a 100-point guy, I don't think so. But to think you're getting a lot of some of those things that might make up for points, I think is a more reasonable expectation of what he's going to bring to the table.
Yeah, and yesterday, great example. Sorry to jump in again, Sean. The play that he makes on Mark Scheifele's breakaway goal. He lifts Mitch Marner's stick. No, that does not show up on any score sheet anywhere. But Sean and I talked about this all the time. He is so strong like a bull.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry. Just a quick one then on Heinola. I mean, obviously, there's been a ton of debate here. Where do you see? What's his ceiling?
Well, I think he's a top 3 guy all day long. He thinks the game at an elite level. And it's fun to watch him grow over 3 World Juniors where, he was so skinny he could hide behind a lamppost in his first one. And he's starting even to fill out a little bit in the face and so on and so forth. And you need that. But I think his 9-game sample last year was impressive. I think he had 4 or 5 points in those games. He's just so smart. So I think he's all day a power play guy. Probably not the shooter. Probably more the disher on the PP. But really smart, excellent, fluent skater. But he thinks the game at that pace that the Jets play at, and that's what's going to really make him effective. And it's funny because a lot of people, Logan Stanley, 6'7", where the heck is he? La la la. And they knew the Jets when they took him that they were going to have to take a patient approach. And I think now he's cemented as one of their top 6 guys, and he's doing things. He's getting pucks through. He's playing big. He's playing physical. And I think with Heinola is the same sort of thing. You just got to wait for Philly to understand that he belongs, that he has the confidence to be able to go out there and play 20 minutes a night. And so we're starting to get to that intersection now with him. Spend some time in the American League, should get his shot. And everyone's talking about over the trade deadline, the Jets got to go get a piece in the back end. Is it going to be, Alexiak? Is it going to be this guy or that guy? I think he can be a piece that helps down the stretch here and into the playoffs. I really do.
Sammy, I'm going to tell you something. You're about the best friend a hockey journalist could have, because I've yet to stump you when I ask you about someone. You've always got details and intel on those guys. It's like having an endless, file of hockey scouting reports to go through, except you're far more fun than reading through them. And and I'll tell you again, one of the funnest experiences I had was ending up in the Canadian parents' room at like 5 a.m. or something like that in the middle of the tournament, because Sammy, everywhere you go with Sammy, there's hockey parents stopping and being like, Sammy. It's the best. It's the best thing in the world. I had so much fun. I cannot wait until the next time I get to work with you and get on the road with you again. It's one of the biggest reasons to hope for this COVID stuff to come to an end, because working with you has been a ton of fun, and I'm sure Ken's going to be crashing on your couch as soon as he gets an opportunity to, once this is all done.
Well, I miss you, man. Like, honestly, we didn't know each other when we went into that World Juniors, and just gelled quickly and ended up having a nice dinner. Dinners are always good, a little bit of wine, mixing it up with the parents a little bit. A lot of fun. I mean, I think sometimes we take our jobs too seriously and we don't stop and smell the roses once in a while. And I think the pandemic, if it's taught us anything, man, I miss Weber sitting there and hanging out and having a glass of wine with you, or Sean, getting out for dinner the few times that we had together. Man, I really miss that. I can't wait for those days. And there's 2 great candidates right there.
Excellent stuff. We didn't even get into the wine.
Thanks for the insight.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the wine. It's a great yeah. Hey, it's all
one over there.
Yeah, three hole in one, 3 Johnny hole in one. He never stops talking about it, Sam. He'll probably bring it up as soon as we get off the show here. I have to hear it all the time. Just be happy you only have to hear it every once in a while when he's eating your food and sleeping on your couch in a little while. Sammy, awesome having you. Lots to talk about with you still, so it's a perfect excuse to bring you on again if you're willing to come on again.
100%. I can't wait. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's been a blast. Sometimes I get the diarrhea mouth, because most of the time you got someone in here saying 10 seconds. Like, I go on those Wednesday night hockeys and I got Matt Marstrom in ears like 10 seconds. So it's nice to be able to freewheel a little bit.
Awesome. Awesome. Great job of it. Sammy, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time, bud. Kenny, another great show. Two great guests. Anything stand out to you more than anything?
Just so fun to be able to have these conversations. I mean, we have it as soon as we turn the show down and try to get it posted. We're so blessed with the relationships that we've been able to foster, and it's so nice to be able to take people behind the curtain and show them how they got to where they got to and where their passion comes from and you know what they feel, and for them to share some of those insights that you don't see every day on TV or hear on radio. So I mean, it's just such a great pleasure. And yeah, I mean, Sam's a guy I got to know really well. We spent a ton of time together at that Memorial Cup in Brandon, and he does such a great job at fostering those relationships. I mean, we both seen it. And he's just one of the most genuine people in the industry, and he's someone that people can learn a lot from. There's no doubt.
Well, I'll tell you this, Kenny. One of the things that we were trying to do with this show was those moments where you finished a game and you're working with different people. Like I've worked with Sammy, like you and I have worked together. You finish up a game and you end up going out and having a pint at the bar afterwards, and that's where some of the best conversations come from. And we've always said, like, wouldn't it be great if we could take these things and give the fans access to it? That's what we've intended to try and do with this. And I don't want to dislocate my shoulder patting ourselves on the back here, Kenny. I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. And again, our audience doing a great job of being part of the conversation, getting some questions in there. It means a ton that you're joining us. I think the first time we did this, we had about 25 people watching. We were consistently over 100, and a lot of people picking the shows up afterwards. I hope we're providing you with content. Sammy giving us some absolutely great stuff. If you're interested in the Jets prospects, he's the guy that you got to listen to. I thought he gave us some great stuff there today. And Jeff Marek, I mean, that was just, like I said, I'm not messing around. Like when you watch him, you come away feeling inspired, and spending that time with him today was absolutely phenomenal. Did he say, sorry, I got a little bit blabbermouth and I was talking over him, but did he say that Friedge gave him the reference to come on the show? Is that what he was saying? Did I miss that? I don't know.
I'm not 100%
I was
sure.
talking. I'm going to have to go over and listen to the tape.
We'll have to go back to the tape. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Either way, we've had some great people on, two more great ones today. I hope you got what we wanted you to get out of the show, everyone who's watching. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a heads up, we'll be back on Instagram for the Saturday game. 45 minutes before the game is the Jets take on in Edmonton, which is going to be a really important game for them, jockeying for position down the stretch. And we'll be back on the formats you're seeing us now for the post game. If you haven't gone to our YouTube page and subscribed yet, get going. Go do that. We got lots of great stuff coming your way. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.